Hey, y'all, welcome to another midweek discussion in our Advent video series. Last week we talked about hope. Today we're talking about peace. And we have some special guests with us to help us take on this topic of peace. So um, here's a surprise for you, a little early Christmas present, I guess. So take a look at who our guests are today. It's the Fushis. So glad to
Hey,
see y'all.
yeah,
Hello,
you too.
community.
Hello.
Good to be with you all.
Carson and Laura Fushi are our CBF missionaries in Japan, and I'm going to have a chat with us today. We're going to end up talking about peace, but first, we want to hear from y'all. Let us know a little bit more. Tell us what's going on in your life. Tell us how you are. Tell us about life and work in Japan. So good to see y'all, and take it away.
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, we have been back. We realize it'll be a year this coming weekend. We will have been back in Tokyo for a year after 14 months in the US, which the last time we were with you all in person, I think was the fall of 2019. And we had planned a 5-month furlough and got kind of stuck in the US as Corona was picking up. And so we ended up extending that for another 9 months before we had this short window where we were able to apply for a new visa after ours had expired and get back into the country. And we got back in, and about 2 weeks later, at the end of our quarantine period, Japan shut down again. And they just opened back up on November 1st to shut down again November 30th with the Omicron variant making the headlines. So we have felt very fortunate to be here, although our work has looked, of course, very different over this last year than we had anticipated. When we got back, Japan saw a huge spike over the really the New Year holiday here, and never really was able, kind of hit a few waves, never was really able to get to a safe point. So our church, which is one of the largest churches in the Japan Baptist Convention, they average about 200 people between a few services every Sunday, has taken a pretty strict stance on gathering. And so we just started gathering again
This month, November.
early November.
Yeah, November. Yeah.
In early November. And that was after we reached about a 75% vaccination rate, and numbers had gone down to the double digits in terms of like case numbers per day. So right now we are about 20 cases per day in Tokyo, which is the lowest it's been since very early in the pandemic. So we're hoping that it'll stay that way even with the new variant. But we're slowly getting back into things, but we've had to do a language practicum with our church, putting our Japanese into practice in a congregational setting, almost entirely from home. And so that has looked like Zoom seminars and online worship. Up until this past Sunday, we had only been to church by ourselves, depending on if we were the preachers that day, preaching for the live stream. So this past Sunday was our first Sunday as a family of 3 going to church together since we've been back.
We'll get to go once a month under the current kind of restrictions that church has in place. So pretty much we split ourselves into 8 different groups by neighborhoods, and each group gets to go 1 time a month, more or less.
Yeah, with 2 services each Sunday. Yeah. So it's been an odd year. It was so fun to watch friends in the US in the spring looked like they were getting back to normal. At that point, we were just really starting vaccinations here. And it's still 2021 has not turned out the way many of us had expected. But it's been really good. We've actually, even though we've been doing a lot from home, we've been able to get to know a lot of our church members a lot better through different, I've been doing spiritual formation seminars. Carson just wrapped up a life story seminar that he did with a small group at our church, just to share stories and learn how to share your own, faith story and life story. And it's also given us opportunity to really get to know our neighborhood. So instead of having the 45-minute commute one way to church, we have pretty much been here and gotten to know a lot of families who also have children our daughter's age, and so
are disconnected. I mean, completely unconnected
right.
to a church. So.
Right. So that has become its own form of ministry and building relationships with people who live just, a few blocks away from us. So it's been a really fruitful year, just very unexpected in what we had imagined upon our return.
And then looking kind of forward, as Laura said, we kind of extended a practicum period for an extra year upon our return. And so right now we're in the midst of a process that we are more or less interviewing with 5 different churches across the country as to where our next work will be and what it will look like. But we have felt a distinct call to work with internationals in some capacity with our Japanese skills, whatever they may be, that we can help to be a bridge between the local Japanese church and their international community, whether that is people who are coming here to work or study, or families that may be mixed nationalities with mixed nationality children. So we see ourselves as, especially as internationals ourselves in Japan, it's a natural connection, and people that we are drawn to and that are drawn to us in community. And so hopefully we can see ourselves as that kind of bridge at a local congregation is going to allow us to do that kind of work. So we're in the process of that and hope to know by end of February where we're going to be. And that timeline's been pushed a little farther back about our start date because we are expecting. And so, yeah. And so we're looking at doing, so that the child's born is due at the end of April. And then we look to start maybe some new work at the end of the summer next year. So our timeline's thrown off a little bit, but for very good reasons. And so we're excited about lots of new things in 2022.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, it's good to catch up with you. And all right. Let's talk about peace. We've been kind of, in Advent, the hope for these videos is that we'll take those traditional themes of Advent, hope, peace, joy, and love, and kind of let those be our themes for these discussions. And so we're talking about peace today, and I'd like to start out by kind of asking the question in a different way. Let's talk about what peace really isn't. And I'll go first and see how you want to add to it. But I think peace sometimes we look at as this contentment, and that's not a bad thing, but kind of at the end of a long and frazzled day, we come home and y'all might not be old enough to remember the Calgon commercials. There was a Calgon made like the oatmeal bath, the commercial was this mom who has this hectic day. She's doing all kinds of things. There's a lot of running around, and the kids are going crazy, and there's traffic in her commute, and there's she comes back, she's home, and the kids are still going crazy, and something's burning, and and she just looks up to the sky and says, "Calgon, take me away." And then the next scene is her immersed in her bath, and the peace of God is with her.
Sure. Yeah.
Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, but I'm going to take a bath and it's going to be all right. Now, that's the peace I wish for every day, but I also wish for that peace to be all over me for like the time from the time I wake up to the time I accept that kind of peace at the end of the day. That's that's what I want. But I think there is more to it than this um this moment. But I want to explore that a little bit farther. So what's your peace is not idea?
Yeah, peace is not everything being okay all the time.
Yeah.
It's I mean that's kind of playing off of what you said as well, but I think even sometimes with Advent, and even in thinking of Christ as the Prince of Peace, we have kind of we might have an image of Silent Night, like just this quiet world where like nothing is wrong. And I don't know that that's, and especially when we think about what we're called to do as Christians, that that's necessarily the, if that's necessarily the end of what we're getting at. It's much more about making things right. And in order to do that, things may not feel perfect in that process. And so those are some of the things that I was thinking about even before when you invited us to have this chat.
I kind of think about, go ahead, Carson.
No, I was just going to say, peace is not just kindness. I mean, peace is greater still than just a kind word or a kind gesture. There's this magnification of that kind of love and kindness that we are called upon to offer to each other and to ourselves. So I'd say, that peace is not just kindness. It's something much greater.
I had a friend who started taking antidepressants, and we worked together, and especially around Advent, getting closer to Christmas, we could make this list of all the hectic things that were happening, and we'd go down the list, and we'd say, this is happening, and this is happening, and this is going on, and this is happening, and this is not happening, and this is broken, and this needs. And at the end of the list, he would say, but I'm taking this medicine and it's okay. So I think we kind of hope that peace would come in pill form or bottle form, something that could help us just chase away all the things that press in on us. Yet, I think the way we established this conversation to start with in our emails was that peace is something you have to work for and work within. And so let's start working off I guess it's an MLK quote. I couldn't find where it comes from. I'm sure it's easily cited, but one of the quotes that's attributed to Martin Luther King Jr. is that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. And so let's talk a little bit about how that makes for peace. One of the things I think about when I think about that quote is kind of the hope that y'all have of connecting cultures here, the American folks and Japanese folks around Hiroshima and other some of the other work that you do. So you're out there actually working for peace. So fill us in and enlighten us. Tell us more.
Yeah, it's well, I think that Hiroshima is certainly, and Nagasaki are both just really powerful images and ways that we have ourselves come to learn so much from our Japanese partners about what peacemaking can look like. And to begin with that, we really had to begin to unravel a bit what we had been taught all of our lives about World War II. And so a lot of that for us is just taking the posture of listening to a different viewpoint, which is not one that there's no responsibility taken or anything like that. But as living in a culture and the only country that has actually experienced nuclear weapons, and to hear stories from survivors and to hear people that Christians and non-Christians that don't ever want to see it happen again, to have something like that happen to you for whatever reason there was for it, to have it happen to you and then say, we don't want it to happen to anyone else.
And then try to rally the world around disarmament.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just a really powerful witness to making peace in the world. And it's not a popular stance, as almost, many other countries are trying to build their arsenal and make sure that they're well protected. The idea that Japan, has chosen a different path, at least up until this point, for about 75 years, is just a really unique witness. And so it's been really good for us to learn. Japan Baptist Convention churches every August is dedicated to praying for peace and remembering the end of the war, the 2 bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I remember it must have been in 2019, that August, our church had they always have a service on August 15th, which was the day that Japan surrendered. And I prayed a prayer in English, and there was also a church member who is Korean who sang a solo. And that also is important because the war did not just affect America and Japan, America and Europe. It was, there are still relationships in Asia that are very much strained because of what happened during World War II and Japan's occupation and all of that. And so it was just a really beautiful witness that we could come together even in multicultural ways in one church's service to do that. And this year, our church did an online service, and the national broadcasting company actually came in and videoed their service and premiered it as a part of a special on groups that were promoting peace. And that's when Christianity is 1% of the population. That is a very strong witness that Christians are working for peace.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's, when we think of peacemaking in Japan, it's hard not to immediately go to, of course, the origins of, nuclear, of the atomic bombs with World War II, but now that has been carried even further into a lot of Baptists that speak out against nuclear energy. After the earthquake in 2011, where there was a nuclear meltdown, it has moved into not just a violent thing, but an environmental and protection of life for the Japanese people. So unfortunately, the government has slowly begun bringing some nuclear plants in other areas of the country back on. And there are Baptists and Christians and many people here in Japan that are trying to prevent another meltdown and disaster from occurring. And so it extends even beyond just a anti-violence thing, but just anti-life in a lot of ways.
I liked what you said there at the beginning. Well, I liked it all, really. But one of the things you said that you had to, and I'll rephrase it, you had to unlearn some of your baggage of growing up in America and how you were taught about World War II and many other things. So, I see that as a vital part of peace, in that, Jesus is born into the midst of what the Romans would have called a peacekeeping situation. The Roman way of keeping the peace was kind of violent, and kind of anti-life in many situations. So, we see the birth of Jesus and his life and ministry really challenging a strong notion that had been a part of life for so long, for so many people. And I think when Jesus finds himself up against that piece of Rome's situation, he is definitely speaking a language of unlearning, of reimagining, of stopping. I'm going to use the current evangelical dog whistle word of deconstructing, and really, kind of helping believers start over at a very basic but yet life-giving level. And so Jesus's version of peace kind of maybe even will unsettle us. It'll cause us to feel more anxiety than peace sometimes, because he says, all that stuff you learn from a very early age is you need to start over. And but we've been doing it for thousands of years. So even as we begin to think about things in this day and age, does our ministry, does our witness promote the peace of Christ in ways that are life-giving? I love that, like how you phrased it that way. So yeah, I'll be using that Sunday. So
Go ahead.
But in terms of how John the Baptist promotes the peace, but it'll be Joy Sunday then, so we're all joyful about John the Baptist. So.
I think that there's certainly there's a humility that we've also learned from the Japanese Baptists as well, in that they recognize that their nation also had a colonial mindset to save Asia from Europe and America, and did some pretty horrific things across the continent. And they go in with a very humble approach in their own missions, and in their relationships with other Baptist bodies across Asia, in admitting their the faults of not necessarily it wasn't necessarily them that was participating, but their nation participated in these events, and they go in very humbly in their partnerships with other Asian bodies, and they have their own missionaries in Singapore, in Cambodia, and in Indonesia, which all would have been places that Japan had a presence during World War II. And they've just done a really good job of admitting, confessing, and going in as humble partners. And we really appreciate that in their missional approach.
So if peace is the outcome that we hope for, the outcome that we want, it may involve us actually having to give up sometimes in order to have it. So that's starting not to like this idea of peace. It's just
it's hard work. And it can be very uncomfortable. And so when we go back to that, I guess, with what peace is not, it's that the angle is not necessarily, maybe we all will be in a truly peaceful world. We just read the passage about Zion from Micah in our church's Bible study last week. And so if Zion is our image of peace that we're coming to, surely there is a level of comfort there in that no one has to be afraid, but it doesn't mean that like the way to get there is going to be comfortable, because it takes looking at things from a different perspective and
giving things up
and all of that. So
I think from Sundays versus, you have this year the John the Baptist scene is divided, so you get 2 weeks of John the Baptist. And so this past Sunday in year C, John the Baptist gives that quote from Isaiah. He's the one in the wilderness, calling, prepare the way for the Lord. And so this idea of valleys being filled and mountains being made low, of the rough places smoothed out, the crooked things straightened out. If the emperor had called for this grand construction project, it could have gotten done. There would have been an actual highway that ran from Jerusalem to Babylon, and it would have been nice. And there would have been like a Buc-ee's somewhere. Do y'all know Buc-ee's?
We know of it, yes.
You live in the world, you have the internet, you've seen pictures of, how people in Georgia are now going, we're getting Buc-ee's.
Yes.
But there would have been this grand, somewhere halfway, at least. But it didn't, that's not how it worked out. It wasn't the grand list of the world superpowers that Luke introduces at the beginning of that chapter to cite. And then the word of the Lord came to John out in the wilderness. Y'all know John, he's Zechariah's son. And so this clearing of the way for the Lord, that really makes for peace, happens in this kind of one rock at a time moves that we all are called on to do. And so if you look at the grand scheme of how low that valley is or how high that mountain is, and you kind of feel a bit overwhelmed by it. But I think to work for peace, we each do our part, and then we go and help somebody else do theirs, and it's just this building of peace. I think that works well. And I guess we should talk about, especially since we've used this Martin Luther King Jr. quote to kind of catalyze this conversation. Is that a word? Catalyze, to spark it, to start it up. That the work of racial justice is still a huge matter, not just in the South in the United States, but around the world. So tell me some of what you're seeing in Japan of that kind of work to do.
Yeah. Japan is, the context in Japan is so different because you're looking at maybe 1 to 2% of the population that is non-Japanese. So we are still very much in a Japanese context where the vast majority of people are Japanese. But there is still a presence. And even when we think about future ministry in connecting internationals and Japanese churches, we are looking actually at a Japan that is probably going to become increasingly more multicultural, as its population is in a very steep decline over the next few decades. By 2050, it will decrease by 25%, something like that. At the current rate, the birth rate is not keeping up with the aging population at all. And so for Japan to continue on economically, it's very likely that if the pandemic is over, we'll see more people continuing to come in from different parts of the world, especially Asia. So right now, again, we'll point back to our partners. Summer of 2019, we were able to join a group of junior high school students on a trip. It's kind of a series of trips that they do every other year called Meet Your Neighbors. And so we actually just went down to the city of Kawasaki, which is about an hour south of central Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a very large population of Zainichi Koreans, which we actually talked about a little bit when we came in,
Mm-hmm.
Offered a sermon with you all in the fall of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the most discriminated group in Japan. So these were Koreans that were brought over as forced labor during Japan's occupation of Korea. So they're ethnically Korean, but their families have been in Japan for generations.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're kind of in this gray area, their own third culture where they aren't ethnically Japanese, so they don't have the same rights as Japanese people, but all they know in the most recent generations is life in Japan. And so there is work around reaching out to churches that are Zainichi Korean. There is work around preventing an education around hate speech. When hate speech is brought up in Japan, it is almost entirely about hate speech toward these Zainichi Koreans. And so that is particularly a group that our churches have tried to build relationships with, and just, be friends. A lot of times, groups like this get kind of pocketed, and it's hard if you don't have it. It's good to have your own community, but it's also really good to have community from the majority population as well. And so I think that has been one place, and there's some other groups
just ethnic discrimination just exists. I mean, any insider or the majority culture has a tendency to discriminate against the minority groups, and so it exists with the Zainichi. It exists whenever you had a colonial mindset of old Japan that took over the northern island of Hokkaido, and they had Ainu people who were essentially the Eskimo kind of people of Japan. Then you had the Japanese, during the war, they went down and took Okinawa, which had its own kingdom and own people group that looks more Polynesian than it would, mainland, as we call it, Japan. And these people groups have been heavily discriminated against and have been treated as outsiders and have been colonized and forced to assimilate in many ways. And so all that exists. And then you've got ethnic discrimination. So it's like, hey, you can come here and you can come work, but it doesn't mean we're going to like you. That kind of mentality certainly exists in our home country of America, but also here in Japan. It's certainly, you have your insider, outsider discrimination. And so those are things that we, as outsiders ourselves, we understand that we have white privilege, even in Japan. We are favored in many ways as internationals. And so even though our countries were at war, within our grandparents and lifetimes, we are as white missionaries, we are favored in many ways. And so our goal is to use that privilege in as many ways as we can to help other internationals to feel more at home, and for Japanese people to see where it is that they can be more welcoming to these internationals who are very much a part of society here, and who are just in many ways is just as Japanese as they are. And so that is part of our long-term goal here, no matter what actual work is in our job description. As we kind of move into a long-term job description next year, that is going to be our role anywhere that we land.
That's great. All right, well, I think we're at the end of our time here. Anything else you want to throw in here about peace before we let you go to bed?
No, it's just that it's something that we, as I started before, that we've learned so much since we've been here, and that it's often, of course, there are global issues that every country is aware of, but playing off of what you said about just it takes one person doing their role in making peace and helping others do it. It's very contextual, and so for us, we've really benefited from learning from our partners. What does peacemaking look like in Japanese society. And then how do we play a part in that as outsiders, but also people with privilege in many ways. And so it's certainly been one of those themes that we have seen in our time here.
Well, it's good to see y'all today. I'm glad you're doing well, excited for the baby on the way, and
Thanks.
that you get to walk uphill both ways to your doctor appointments. That's something you can hold over your kids' heads later in life. So they never believe you did that. But we are so grateful for the work that y'all are doing, and so glad that you are a part of ministry with us. Thanks for sharing words that will have deep meaning here in Milledgeville, Georgia. So we look forward to getting to talk with you again sometime. And gosh, still want to bless all the work that you do there. So I think a good word to wrap up this conversation: the peace of Christ be with you.
Thank you. And also with you.